Hey everybody, welcome back to Leosophy. This is the third in the Magic series, and this episode is about comparing and contrasting natural versus ceremonial magic. So, ceremonial magic sounds pretty intuitive, but natural magic less so. A lot of people, when they hear that term, they think, oh, like nature worship, and no. In fact, nature worship is more often ceremonial. Natural magic is more closely related, I guess you could say, to modern science. Because alchemy is a form of natural magic, and chemistry is a form of modern science. And um, magical herbalism is related to modern herbalism and modern pharmacology. So you can see connections there. In other words, just as gravity is a natural force, and just as the chemical changes that we observe every day are natural, I almost said natural in nature. They're natural inherently. They're an aspect of the forces of nature that are observable in the universe from a scientific perspective. In the same way, natural magic makes use of those sorts of things. So, in other words, what you're doing is you're not communing with any kind of spiritual force. You're instead actively making use of things that are already found in a natural state. So, alchemy would be a great example of this. Herbalism would be a great example of this. Any kind of act where you have an intended or desired result and you're achieving it through ordinary, I guess you could say, or mundane means, but within a magical system of thinking, that would be natural magic. Whereas ceremonial magic, it's kind of in the name, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a complex set of rituals, although that's usually the case. Ceremonial magic is when you are actively involved in something that has more to do with a spiritual plane of existence. And you could even argue, and I would absolutely argue, that Christian prayers and prayers to guardian angels and things of that sort all actually fall into the realm of ceremonial magic, because what you're really doing is you are communing with a spiritual state of existence in order to achieve an intended or desired result in the mundane world. And depending on what school of thought your particular culture ascribes to, that mundane world might be interconnected with the spiritual world, like in animism, or it might be a completely separate thing, like in, for example, Christian mysticism, or to a oh man, that's when things get really tough. Like in the case of Vodou, aka Voodoo, there's clear delineations between spiritual and mundane, but there's also points where they sort of intersect. And I think that that's actually the most common view religiously. Vodou is a good example of this, but for example, you look at Celtic mythology where there's clearly an other side, and then there's this side of things, but then there's a veil between the two that gets thinner, particularly around Samhain, aka Halloween. So, yeah, this is a shorter one, but I mean, it's really just about comparing and contrasting the chief differences between ceremonial magic, which involves placating or interacting with spirits, angels, gods, demons, whatever you want to call them, elves, things that are not categorized as physical beings in the encyclopedia, for example. Whereas natural magic is on a completely separate and much more, I hate to reuse the word, but mundane view of things. A great example of things that syncretize those concepts would be yoga and Tai Chi, because you're it's very easy to secularize that entirely and say, well, these movements are good for your health, and that is part of the goal of both of those things. But there's also a deeply spiritual and ceremonial component of them that is often ignored, especially in the West, especially when it gets imported over here. But you can see how those use both components. There's a ceremonial component to traditional Tai Chi and yoga, and there is a natural component to Tai Chi and yoga. And it's very easy to separate the two. Same thing with meditation. The chief goal of meditation in most religious traditions is to commune with some sort of deity, or to attain some sort of spiritual state, or I think it would be better to say psycho-spiritual state, because it sort of blends between the two. for an intended result. Whereas the more natural view, which is increasingly common, especially at least from my perspective in the U.S., is that, it does have benefits like alleviating stress and helping with insert problem here, even to a point of alleviating physical symptoms like chronic pain or even more dramatic things like cancer. And it's interesting to see that kind of odd schism between something that bridges natural and ceremonial traditions, and it's being separated out and filtered out by people who want to view it from a completely materialistic perspective. But that's all I got for this particular episode. So like, share, subscribe, keep asking questions. Bye.